there's another delay causing much more consternation. The inquiry into the Iraq War led by the former senior civil servant Sir John Chilcot, which started 6 years ago and still hasn't finished, prompting anguish from bereaved families, a former cabinet minister and prominent critics.
This inquiry is on the cusp of taking longer than the period it is actually addressing.
It forced famously reticent Sir John to this week issue a public statement explaining the long wait. On this edition of Profile, we're doing our own Chilcot inquiry into Sir John. I'll be the chair. The terms of reference are: who is he? Is he too much a creature of the establishment? And why is he taking so long? The witnesses include a contemporary from school.
He seemed more of a grown-up than the rest of us. He always used to seem to be very well organised and very even-tempered.
We'll speak to another former Mandarin who's worked with him.
He is competent, very intelligent, judicious. He was marked out for stardom.
We'll hear too from those who've observed him up close.
In some ways you could say he's a nerd, but the idea that he's bullyable or that he will roll over, I think is a very false view. I think he is very, very strong.
And the best bit? Our inquiry is only going to take 15 minutes.
I'm today announcing the establishment of an independent Privy Councillor Committee of Inquiry. It will consider the period from summer 2001, before military operations began in March 2003, and our subsequent involvement in Iraq right until the end of July this year.
Gordon Brown in June 2009, launching a vast inquiry into the Iraq War. After being given a whole 10 minutes to think about it, Sir John Chilcot accepted the invitation to chair it. He retired from the civil service nearly 20 years ago after a long career. Here's the Telegraph columnist and frequent luncher of Whitehall Nights, Sue Cameron.
He is an old-style Mandarin with all the great virtues of old-style Mandarins. Absolute impartiality, integrity, thoroughness, tremendous sense of fairness.
Assisted by a panel of the great and the good, Sir John spent 2 years questioning 130 witnesses.
And no regrets?
Responsibility, but not a regret for removing Saddam Hussein. I think he was
Be quiet, please.
Sir John's style of questioning was criticised by some, like the international lawyer and prominent critic of the war, Philippe Sands QC.
I think it's fair to say that from the perspective of a practising barrister, some of the questions were surprising, or as others might say, even rather pathetic, in the way they sought to deal with simple issues or complex issues. I sat in person on the day when the former Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, was being questioned.
Turning to specifically the dimension of international law, would be interesting to know what your view then and indeed now.
The most striking aspect as an observer was the extreme deference given to the person who was being questioned.
After the drama, or not, of the hearings came the painstaking work of reading 150,000 official papers. But it turns out Sir John is a fan of inquiries. He's done others on royal security, on using wiretap evidence in court. He's even investigated Iraq before, assisting the former Cabinet Secretary Lord Butler with his 2004 review into the intelligence on weapons of mass destruction.
He was very thorough, he was very reasonable. He did quite a bit of the drafting, and he was a great help in that because, there was some political tension in the review team, and John was always the sort of person one could trust to find a judicious phrase which was acceptable to the whole review team.
Oh, so ever the diplomat.
Ever the diplomat. I mean, yes, for somebody who wasn't a member of the diplomatic service, he is a very accomplished diplomat.
Chilcot's diplomatic skills had been severely tested before. In the 1990s, he spent 7 years as the top civil servant at the Northern Ireland office in Belfast.
The Taoiseach and I have now agreed on a joint declaration on Northern Ireland. It makes no compromise on strongly held principles, but it does embody our common view that there is an opportunity to end violence for good in Northern Ireland.
He helped John Major negotiate with the Irish government to produce the Downing Street Declaration, which paved the way for the Good Friday Agreement.
It was the height of the Troubles. Bombs were going off more or less daily. People were getting killed. There was an atmosphere of tension, no doubt about that, but also an atmosphere that we were there to do our job, and everybody was tuned in precisely to doing our job, not least Sir John, who was at the hub of it all.
That's the former Conservative MP Michael Mates, who was a Northern Ireland minister at the same time.
I'd never been a minister before, and John could not have been kinder and more helpful while I was scrabbling around trying to find out how the system worked. And I could not have had a better tutor or mentor, and then we became very firm personal friends, and that's remained for the last 20-some years.
It was often a bit cloak and dagger, recalls Stephen Coburn, an old school friend.
I remember meeting him at a Conservative Party conference. I was a constituency chairman, and I think it must have been a Blackpool conference that I was attending. And there was my old school friend, John Chilcot, wearing a name badge that was not John Chilcot. And I think that was what you had to do if you were working, whatever it was, in the Northern Ireland agencies or something. And it was quite interesting that here was a degree of anonymity for a civil servant that was provided for obviously security purposes.
But finding out what this civil servant is like as a person is not easy. His friends really don't give much away about how he spends his free time. I tried with his old Northern Ireland chum, the former MP Michael Mates.
We've been to the opera, we've been to the theatre, we do things that friends do. And he participates and enjoys, I think, as much as anybody else. He's extremely well-read and extremely knowledgeable, as you would expect from someone who's risen to the top of the civil service. I don't want to malign him. I think you would call him a generalist. He knows a lot about a lot of things.
We know some details of his private life. He was born in 1939, his dad a graphic designer. He's married to Roz, who's an artist. They live in a remote village on Dartmoor where there's no mobile reception. He studied modern and medieval languages and English at Cambridge with the author of this.
When the police arrived and found no lion, no broken wall and no convicts, a formal inquiry was set up. And then the truth about...
Yes, C.S. Lewis was a tutor at the time, and Sir John credits the author of the Narnia books with teaching him about emotional intelligence. Before that were his slightly grim-sounding school days. Young John Chilcot was a scholar at Brighton College, where a fellow pupil was Peter Mayle, the author of the best-selling book A Year in Provence.
Sort of tried to be like the traditional public school, in that it was very Spartan. It was, from time to time, rather brutal. You had to work hard, and you had to watch your P's and Q's, and there were a lot of these ridiculous public school rules, like if you were caught walking across the quadrangle with one button undone of your jacket, you were punished for it. I mean, it was full of things like that. It's rather like being in the army, I imagine.
But it sounds like it suited the boy Chilcot just fine.
He always seemed pleasant, even charming in those days, which is quite something for someone of 14 or 15. And he seemed more of a grown-up than the rest of us. That's all I can really remember of him. He just seemed to be sailing through, no troubles at all. You know, you wouldn't catch him, I don't think, doing anything untoward. I can't imagine him getting punishment drills, for instance. And the other thing that I remember, that he never seemed to suffer, as the rest of us did, from acne.
Shame there were no girls. Another old boy, Stephen Coburn, remembers a bookish student with a gift for admin, handy for the cricket team.
As an intelligent boy, a scholar, as he was, with presumably fairly clear handwriting, he was the official scorer for the first 11 in that season. And Brighton College had a very good cricket 11 in those days. At least 2 seasons in the 50s they were unbeaten, so there was quite a lot of scoring to do.
So even at school, he was acting as the sort of quintessential administrator, official and bureaucrat.
Interesting you should put it like that. But yes.
I must ask, was he ever late with his homework?
Well, I see what you mean. Yes. I mean, well, look, you wouldn't have been scorer for Geoffrey Lees's unbeaten first 11 unless you were painstaking, shall we say.
But why is this current assignment taking so long? Sir John is mired in a process called Maxwellisation, named after the tycoon Robert Maxwell, where subjects of an inquiry get a preview and a chance to respond. And there was a long delay as the government decided whether to publish details of private chats between Tony Blair and George Bush. Sue Cameron of The Telegraph.
I think that he is being criticised even from within the establishment itself in a sort of Mandarin-like way. And these criticisms do have to be taken on board. The old ways of Whitehall of, well, it takes as long as it takes and we have our procedures and they're absolutely rigorous and we have to follow them through. It's 20th century ways of doing things. And the public, however unfairly, the public mood has changed. So I think he's been ill-served by other parts of Whitehall, particularly the long wrangling over which documents he would be free to disclose in some way or refer to.
Friends say Sir John hates the publicity, with reporters camped outside his home and office. And the longer the delay, the greater the anger of the families who lost loved ones in the conflict. The former Cabinet Secretary, Lord Butler.
Well, I would be confident that he would be really quite upset about that, and he'd be wanting to do his best for them, but he'd be wanting to do his best consistently with being accurate and being fair. And, of course, I think one of the points being made by others that if, when he produces his report, it can be shown to have mistakes in it, then that devalues the whole report and makes it much less valuable to the people who are aggrieved and who mourn relations that they lost.
A far less charitable interpretation comes from the QC Philippe Sands, one of Chilcot's chief critics.
He is an establishment figure. He has served the state for a lifetime. Is that the kind of person who is going to conduct the kind of inquiry that I think the people of the United Kingdom were hoping for? It's doubtful to me that it is.
But Sir John's old school friend, Stephen Coburn, rejects the charge that Chilcot is an establishment lackey.
I don't think he has any interest in preferment, if you see what I mean now. He got his preferment, didn't he? I mean, he was top dog in his ministry. He got a knighthood, and he's now chairing an inquiry. My goodness, I mean, he's reached the top. He's going to do a very thorough, very proper job on this.
This week, experts worked out how to stop Big Ben's bongs being late. But is this discreet civil servant of the old school, who seems to prefer life out of the spotlight, possibly running out of time?